And in today's video, we provide an educational video on what prosecution must prove in a criminal case of murder, like the death cap mushroom case in Australia as currently ongoing. We'll use this for an example. So here are the brief facts of the Australian mushroom case. Well, it's ongoing, and as I said, an Australian woman accused of murdering her estranged husband's parents and aunt by serving them a beef Wellington laced with poisonous mushroom. And the defendant denies all charges, claiming the deaths were a terrible accident, and the prosecution alleges she served the guest the meal knowing that it contained the deadly death cap mushrooms. So in murder cases and cases in general, the prosecution must prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the defendant intentionally caused the death of another. And also with Irish law, intention is one of the key ingredients for the prosecution to prove for such a conviction like murder or even other cases. Now the prosecution must also prove causation, and the prosecution must prove that the defendant's actions directly cause the victim's death, and if there's a break in the chain of causation, e.g. for example, an intervening cause like another person's actions, this could weaken the prosecution's case. Now, the prosecution must prove that the defendant is the person who committed the crime, and this can involve physical evidence like DNA, fingerprints, eyewitness testimony, or other means. What's known in law as mens rea, which is Latin for guilty mind, the prosecution must prove. In many cases, the prosecution has to demonstrate that the defendant had the mental state required for murder. Intent, recklessness, or negligence could be a determining factor based on the charge also. So if the prosecution fails to prove any of these elements, well, the defendant may be entitled to an acquittal, or they may be convicted of a lesser offence like manslaughter, as the jury decide. So like criminal cases in the United Kingdom and Ireland, these are usually the issue the prosecution must prove, and so using the death cap mushrooms case for an example, the jury should be satisfied of all the elements in the case for a conviction of murder, i.e. the person intended to cause harm or death, and this would be a likely result of serving those death cap mushrooms. And if they can prove she knew they would kill these people, or that she was reckless as to whether she should have known, the first element is complete. Then secondly, the prosecution want to prove that the defendant serving the poisoned mushrooms were the cause of their death. Now, if some other factor breaks the chain of causation and causes death, it may prove difficult, as already said, to establish causation. So here the prosecution would likely use pathology, or in this case also toxicology. Now next, the jury must also be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant's actions caused the deaths of the persons who consumed the mushrooms, and the courts will carefully assess the reliability and credibility of all evidence provided. The various forms of evidence considered by courts usually are witness testimony and statements, forensic evidence, documentary evidence, circumstantial evidence, and one of the widely adopted cases in the area of prosecution to prove a case in criminal law beyond reasonable doubt in other cases is Wilmington versus the DPP, which is a UK case, as much of our Irish law is adopted from the UK. So this reasonable doubt principle is also applicable to UK law and Australian law and other jurisdictions, as the case may be. So Wilmington versus the DPP, 1935, is a House of Lords decision, and the case in this area is the heart of the judgment, also referred to in law as the ratio decidendi, was quoted as follows as saying, it says, through the web of English criminal law, one golden thread is always to be seen, that is the duty of the prosecution to prove the prisoner's guilt subject to the defence of insanity, and subject also to any statutory exemption. And if at the end of the whole of the case there is a reasonable doubt created by the prosecution evidence given by either prosecution or the prisoner, the prosecution has not made out the case and the prisoner is entitled to an acquittal. And it went on to say, the court, that no matter what the charge or where the trial is, the principle that the prosecution must prove the guilt of the prisoner is part of the common law of England, and no attempt to whittle it down can can be entertained. Now, this judgment was adopted into Irish law, and it's given in a principle of the case The People, the DPP versus Quirk in 2011. This case reinforced the idea that prosecution has a responsibility of proving its case, and again it cited key principles from Wilmington. In the case, the court clarified that the standard of proof required in criminal cases is consistent with the ruling in Wilmington. So I hope this offers an educational view on the rules of criminal law cases from an Irish and other jurisdiction perspective. Now, I will examine the case of the dead cat mushrooms in detail when it concludes, as it's an interesting case, and it's not only criminal law interesting, but forensics and toxicology evidence interest also. So I hope you enjoyed this short educational video. Take care, and do subscribe, costs you absolutely nothing.